when they are exercising their Christ-given authority over the deacons. And the deacons must not be resentful of that, must not charge the elders with sticking their noses in business which is not theirs when the elders are exercising that rule. That's the one side, and I think that's very important. On the other side, however, I think the elders have to be careful. They must exercise rule over the office of deacons, but they must not intrude into that office. And by intruding into that office, I mean, number one, make the work of the deacons their own, and number two, tell the deacons how to do their work. That's not the elder's business. I think the general principle is here, the principle of Article 16, once again, that the elders in their rule over the deacons must see to it that the deacons perform the duties of their office in a way which is in harmony with Scripture and our confessions and the church order. But they must not, how shall I put it? They have to be discreet, they have to be wise, they have to be conscious of the fact that the deacons function in an office equal with theirs. The office of deacons is not a lower office, a lesser office, an office of less importance. And the elders are not deacons and must not try to make themselves deacons and must not try to think that they know better than the deacons how to do that work. They must not do that. So they must just simply see to it that the work is carried on as Christ himself wants it to be carried on. And if the elders detect that that's not the case, then they have every right to call that to the deacon's attention and correct them, and the deacons must submit to that. But they must not intrude on the office. I think that's not right and is detrimental to the work of the deacons. And it seems to me that's when the morale of deacons would be destroyed, or the morale of deacons would be lowered, when elders try to intrude in the office and take over the work themselves. But I don't know how often that happens. I don't want to leave the impression as if this is a common thing. I haven't, in the congregations that I served, I have never seen anything like this. If anything, the elders were a little bit too laid back, I think. So, okay, anyone else on that? Neil?
Well, what should be the role then of the elder that, that's our policy anyway, that we have one elder present at our deacon's meeting? What should be that elder's role at that meeting?
In my judgment, his role is limited to observer and advisor in case his advice is sought. I do not think that in the discussions that the deacons carry on, the elder should take a part, unless his advice is asked. In fact, I'm most reluctant, even, I suppose in some instances that wouldn't be so bad, but I'm most reluctant even for an elder, if he should see something going on with which he does not agree, to take it upon himself alone to correct the deacons. I don't think he should do that, unless it's a minor thing. But if he finds something with which he disagrees, he must bring it himself to the elders, and the elders must decide, and the elders must themselves, as a body, bring these matters to the attention of the deacons. I don't think an elder ought ordinarily to take part in the discussions. I don't think so. We speak of advisory vote. I don't think an elder really even has advisory vote. I don't think so. If the deacons ask his advice, that's another thing, and he may certainly give it. if he feels in a position to do that. Somebody else asked for the floor. Tom?
In the relationship now, the elder and deacon, is it possible that in a small congregation where maybe it warrants one elder, possibly two and one deacon, that on the basis of Acts 6, that the apostles took the care of tables until they got too busy, that an elder could function as a deacon, so that it wasn't necessary to have the office of deacon until it became evident that the workload was too much for the elders? Now, and I know in light of the fact of earlier discussion, we've talked about that in the Old Testament counterparts in the New Testament, we didn't have an overlap of those offices, but is that possible?
No, I would not be in favor of that. The offices are separate and distinct, and the lines ought to be drawn between them. If there are emergency situations and there are extenuating circumstances, of course. You have, for example, the problem of the mission field. It's my judgment that on the mission field, the missionary, to a certain extent, embodies all three offices. Otherwise, you don't even have the office of elder and deacon represented there. And we have sort of taken that position, you know. When Reverend Lubbers was in Jamaica, for example, for several years, he functioned pretty much as a minister and as an elder and as a deacon. When clothing was sent and money was sent, he distributed it. He took care of all that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think if there's only one deacon in a congregation, because the congregation is small, you're going to have a situation where the elders function as deacons too. And the whole council, what we call council, would do the work of elders and deacons. So in circumstances like that, it's not wrong. But the offices ought to be kept as separate as possible. That's my judgment. Anyone else on this? Yes, Tom.
Back to this elder visiting the diacon. Should he be, if somebody's before the diacon, should he question it? Should he join into that?
I don't think so.
He should just be advised.
His role, in my judgment, according to Article 16, is just simply, in his capacity as elder, to see to it that the work of the deacons is done according to the command of Christ, and he should not busy himself in that work itself. And talking to those who come to the diaconate requesting help is part of the work of the deacons, not his. That's my judgment. You may disagree with that, of course, if you like. Anyone else on that point? I guess in a certain sense of the word, it boils down to this, men. When Christ puts men into the office of deacons, and those men are conscientious and dedicated servants of Christ, can't they do their own work? It's my judgment that they can, and that they ought to. Seems to me when an elder, in one form or another, makes it his business to take part in the work, it's a kind of a reflection on the ability of the deacons to do it. And I don't think we ought to have that. I trust our deacons, and I am persuaded that our deacons are conscientious about their labors and do their labors before the face of Christ, prayerfully. And for that reason, they ought to be allowed to do it themselves too. And what I've said of of elders holds true for ministers too. I think is a temptation. I know of instances of this. There's a temptation where a minister makes it his business to shoulder some of the work of the diaconate. I know of a case, for example, where the minister kept all the deacons' books, went along on occasion on deacons' calls, was present at every deacons' meeting. I think that's wrong. I think that's absolutely wrong. And no minister ought to assume to himself a wisdom and a power and an authority which he does not possess. It seems to me that that engenders a lack of trust in the office of deacon. That's my opinion. If I were a deacon, I would be jealous of the office in the good sense of the word. I would be. All right. Now we're going to look, yeah, Herb.
It would seem to me that being true, what you just said, of course, jealous of the office is a really good statement. It would seem to me that included in that is this, that it's altogether possible that a problem could come up in the diaconate, that they felt that they needed counsel, and the wisdom of the deacons would say, let's seek some counsel on this. And I think that's included in being jealous concerning the office. That is to know when they need counsel. I think it's been said many times that it's a wise man that surrounds himself with good counsel. And I think there's room for that in the diaconate on a particular problem.
I agree wholeheartedly with that, but I would want to add to that, Herm, that if the deacons really feel the need of counsel in their work, that it would be much wiser for them to go with their problem to the elders as a body, rather than to consult the one elder who happens to be with them. Not as a reflection on that one elder, but if the problem is of such a kind that the deacons feel the need for advice and counsel, because the problem is a difficult one, I would be very much inclined to say, by all means, bring your problem to the consistory, to the body of elders as a whole.
I would agree with that.
Darrell.
Well, I think it's true, maybe it's axiomatic, that when a person speaks, either in the diaconate or in the consistory, that he uses the pronoun we rather than I, from what you just said, that the deacons as a body go down there, not even a committee of deacons, but the deacons as the diaconate as a whole sees the entire consistory. Because when you have one man reporting, it's not a committee.
Oh, yes.
And you can end up with all kinds of problems.
Oh, yes. Unless the deacons themselves would agree to a letter or something like that.
Right.
Oh, yes, absolutely. John?
I have seen many cases where elders or pastor, in one case, tied the hands of the deacons by more or less committing themselves before the deacons could even look into a case. I think of one instance where a minister was trying to encourage somebody to join our church, and they were reluctant because they didn't think they'd be able to pay tuition. And the minister said, oh, if you can't pay the tuition, the deacons will take care of it. They've done that before, you know. And that's the way the man came to the diaconate after he joined the church. Said the minister said that he was going to take care of it. And I've seen other cases also where the people in the church will tell somebody, why, go to the deacons, your case certainly will be taken care of, because they've already passed judgment on it, and they tie the hands of the deacons in that way.
No, that's improper, although I think the minister makes a serious mistake No, let maybe go a step back further. I think a man makes a serious mistake if his only barrier to joining our churches is the fact that he has some problems paying tuition. There's not much principle involved in that, you know. I would seriously question the man's principle to begin with. But no, the situation you described is wrong, absolutely wrong. Okay, C. Should deacons in small consistories vote on discipline cases, go on discipline calls, make motions on disciplinary matters? The reference here, as you know, is to Article 37 of the church order. The last part of that article, the last sentence in that article reads, whenever the number of elders is small, the deacons may be added to the consistory by local regulation. They may be added. This shall invariably be the rule where the number is less than 3. So if there are less than 3 elders, then the rule of the church order is that the deacons must be added to the body of elders. They must be added to the consistory. If the number is more than 3, or 3 or more, then it's a matter of the choice of the consistory itself, whether they want to do this. So, assuming that, the question is, when the deacons are added to the consistory, may they vote on disciplinary cases? May they go on discipline calls? May they make motions? What's your judgment on that? Bob? Oh, you look so wise, I thought you sure you were going to say something. Anyone like to comment on that? John?
Well, it sounds that what the church order is saying is that, in fact, in a small church, the deacon should also be considered an elder. Or do I misunderstand?
No, that's correct. That's Article 37. You look surprised. Anyone else? Darrell?
Well, I would say that to avoid a lot of problems, if at all possible, keep the two separate. I served in a church where many of the things were joined, and it was a constant bone of contention. And I would say that some of the smaller churches, if at all possible, separate the two completely. And have the deacons do their work and the elders do their work. And you run into problems when the things are overlapped. The deacons may have advisory vote on this matter, and profession of faith, for example, or dismissal papers, or things like that. And at a particular council meeting, you didn't know whether you could vote on it or not, because the lines were not drawn clearly. And I think, from my experience, the quicker you can separate the two and keep them separate, the better.
Anyone else? Tom?
Should the deacons even be present? Should the council meeting carry on right into a testimony where the deacons witnessing the elders discussing disciplinary cases and voting on it? Do they have to have that now?
I think the question, Tom, is where is in churches where the deacons are added to the consistory. I think ordinarily where the deacons function in their office separately from the elders, what you say is true. But Article 37 says if you have a small church with a small consistory, then the deacons are added to the consistory. And then they should be present for the entire consistory meeting. for all the business. And I think this is the problem which this question is discussing. When the deacons are present for the whole consistory meeting, what is their status in matters of discipline? That's the question as I understand it. Darrell?
Well, I think the problem is that probably starting in '53, many of our congregations were small, and we had small councils, or a small number in the diaconate, small number in the consistory. And the whole thing was thrown together. And I think some of our churches are still in that same old vein, and everybody just goes along with it and says, hey, you know, this is the way it's always been done. I mean, that's 25 years ago. But the lines are not drawn unless you sit down as a council and say, we have to divide the thing up. And the deacons are excused after the ordinary running of the church business is done, the council business is done, the consistory goes to its meeting and the deacons go to their meeting, or they go home. And I, for one, did not care to sit in on disciplinary matters, and I would feel completely out of place sitting in a consistory meeting as a deacon. But I think some of our churches that were small and now have grown, they still have the old ways, and those things have to be called out and separated. I think that's where this problem comes from.
John?
Well, how does this fit then, Article 37, with the definition that you gave in your first lecture? You drew the three pictures. You had the minister in one, the elder in the other, and the deacons in the other. The elder and minister shared, minister and the deacon shared. But you didn't have a line drawn between the elder and deacon. How does that Article 37 fit with that definition?
Cliff? That's a good question. Cliff?
I think the principle that they're trying to bring out is that there's a very dangerous situation that's set up when you have two elders making these large, important decisions concerning discipline. A small congregation in which emotions can run high, and what they'd like to do is, I don't know the practice of our churches through the years, but I think what the principle they'd like to do is they'd like to create more equilibrium in the decision-making process. By adding the deacons, I would feel that they should have fully as much input and decision-making as the elders do, and in function be no different.
Bruce?
I guess that's what Down in Munchman's commentary on the church order explains too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that that's the final authority, but that's one reference that I like to. It's on page 166, 167. Just want to read a sentence here. It says, to deny the deacons a right to vote in cases of discipline, for instance, would be contrary to the church order and duties which have been imposed on them by local arrangement. However, when matters pertaining to the government of the church are being considered, the deacons should certainly bear in mind that governmental matters belong first of all to the domain of the elders. And further it goes on to explain that the elders are assistant deacons, and the deacons are assistant elders. But that contrast, that difference in the office should definitely be there. That when the consistory as a whole is talking about the active matters, that the elders give due consideration to the deacons. The consistory is talking about governmental matters and discipline. And the deacons do have a vote, but they must give consideration to the elders. And their experience in their council on that.
John?
I think that's what Huntsman and Bellen and many of our fathers tried to do, is to make sure that there wasn't power of a few, and that there isn't lording. That's why in a
Darrell, did you ask for the
Well,
floor?
I think the key word in Article 37 is by local arrangement or by local regulation. And I think the problem is that the deacons are elected into small congregations and they really don't know what they have to do. And I think that that should be spelled out very early, that the elders and the deacons, the elders instruct the deacons. Now, listen, you can vote on this and this and this and this, and you can't vote on this. But try as I might, I could not find a local regulation. So I think sometimes these things kind of grow like topsy, and deacons are at a real disadvantage because they don't know what the local regulation is, because it's buried back in the minute books, maybe going all the way back to 1953. I think that's where it comes.
I think, Darrell, that you're probably not reading that phrase by local regulation correctly. At least, my study of the church order and of the authorities has led me to interpret that phrase by local regulation to mean that if the deacons are to be added to the consistory, this must be done by decision of the consistory, period. If the deacons are added to the consistory, according to Article 37, and I think we better get that firmly fixed in our heads, if the deacons are added to the consistory, according to Article 37, the deacons have the right to function along with the elders in every matter coming before the body. Every matter, including discipline. That's Article 37. To put it a little differently, when the deacons are added to the consistory by local regulation, or by virtue of the requirement of Article 37, when the consistory is less than 3, those deacons function in fact as elders. That's the meaning of Article 37.
You know, but the problem I have is not necessarily with discipline cases, but there are things that have to do with worship, for example, as well.
The deacons must have a part in that.
Okay, but now, let's say that you do much of the work that the elder does, except the discipline cases. In the church that I served in, we did many of the things that the elders do, except the disciplinary matters. And that's why I say the local regulation, or whatever it is, it was never clearly defined. And then we had kind of a halfway house where we had advisory vote, and then eventually they drew the line sharply. This is elder's work, this is deacon's work. We're large enough now, we're going to separate the two completely. But I think until that time, where they're half and half meshed, you may vote on this, you may vote on that, I think that's what causes problems. And that's why I don't understand by local regulation. Is it you come to the first council meeting or the consistory meeting and say you men now may vote on everything that comes up here?
Well, let's see if we can sort it out a minute. I don't want to spend too much time on this. To sort it out briefly, Article 37 says, in my judgment, that if a congregation is small and the number of office bearers is small, the consistory has the right, by decision, to add to its body the deacons. That's what local regulation means. The local, in other words, the local consistory itself decides that. However, if the number is less than 3, then it has to be done. That's one thing. In the second place, when the deacons are added to the consistory, it must be understood that the deacons then function in the office of elder. They do.